Have you ever experienced an artist whose work was unique to them as an individual and immediately recognizable as that artist, while simultaneously pushing the boundaries in what seems to be some sort of weird paradox? I can certainly think of some examples, and you probably can too, just off the top of your head. And in an age where every other video I see is about how AI is about to replace every artist in existence, how can we ensure that our own work isn't easily replaceable? Can such a personal, recognizable style be developed at all, or are certain artists just endowed with that at birth? Well, there certainly might be some things that people are just born to be better at, but I do think there are some actionable things that we can do to make our own art stand out from the crowd. So here's 5 quick tips and tricks and trick tips and— wait a second, this isn't TikTok. It actually takes— now, hear me out on this— work. Since I've started making composition-related videos, I've gotten a fair amount of "you're overthinking it," or "I never limit myself," or "no rules, just right." Actually, that last one might be something else. Unfortunately, most memorable art requires both thinking and some degree of work. But in this sense, work doesn't necessarily have to mean laborious or tedious. It simply means it takes some effort to create art, especially art that stands out from the crowd and lasts. And I don't really understand how that's considered a controversial statement, but there's a reason the path of least resistance is so well traveled, and why, in spite of the tools needed to create now being more readily available to everyone, the unique masterpiece is still relatively rare. Work is not intrinsically a bad thing. You can actually enjoy your work. And despite what the YouTube comment sections might have you believe, you don't have to apply your own standards to everyone else. Those are for you. The first step on the journey to developing your voice is developing your taste. No matter how much of a renegade, rebel artist you deem yourself, your work is going to have rules, whether you assign them to it or not. If you've ever finished a track, you've made a series of decisions, choosing this sequence over that one, or choosing not to have sequences at all. We each get to choose how intentional and consistent we want to be with those decisions, and if you're wondering why most music gets lost in the crowd, it's because most people haven't spent much time thinking about this and are just making things up as they go along. And that's a necessary step, I think. I'll get to that in just a second. But if our desire is to create a recognizable artistic voice, while not simply roughly writing the same things over and over, at some point we're going to have to be more intentional with our decision-making, finding that ever-moving line between artistic consistency and pushing the boundaries of our own creativity, once again requiring thought, focus, and work. This is where it gets tough because neither I nor anyone else can or should tell you what your taste should be. It takes self-discovery, time, effort that only you can control. I try to avoid making definitive statements in relation to art because it's all subjective, but I do think there's at least one necessary ingredient to developing your taste. Taste requires choice, and choice requires having more than one option. If I only have one pair of basic white guy shorts in my drawer, or better yet, I've never even seen another pair of shorts, I can't legitimately proclaim them to be my favorite pair of shorts of all time, of all the shorts that were ever made. I need options to choose from. We're all a result of our prior experiences, and that leads us towards certain biases. There's an old saying that goes something like, we don't necessarily know what we like, but rather we like what we know. And in spite of this, in order to truly develop taste, we have to be willing to push ourselves out of our comfort zones and try new things that might make us a little uncomfortable. Let's take a composer like Arnold Schoenberg, one of the key founders of serialism and 12-tone rose. While this was the style and method that the composer is most remembered for, it's worth noting that he was an effective practitioner of almost every musical style of his day. There were elements of neoclassicism in his early work, and he explored atonality as well before developing a sort of composite style that was both highly ordered, in 12-tone rose, but avoided any sense of a tonal center or functional harmony. Now, whether we like his work or not is totally irrelevant to this conversation. The facts are the composer clearly arrived at what resonated with him the most through a series of experimentation, trial and error, and knowledge of what surrounded him. He mastered a number of techniques, chose his favorite elements from all of those, and developed his own personal style. This means that Schoenberg had an undeniable, keenly developed sense of taste. So while we think of Schoenberg as a great experimentalist, and he most certainly was, he didn't arrive there just by do whatever you want broing his way through existence. Not by proclaiming himself a rebellious, too cool for school rule breaker, simply to avoid having to actually work on his craft, but by delving more deeply into it. It's a bit freeing when we realize that despite it being what we're in great pursuit of, nothing is truly original. Everything stands on the shoulders of what came before it. It's impossible for us not to view the world through the lens of our own experiences. You see this in more than just music, I assure you. But as it relates to our creative output, that shows up as us imitating the people that we admire the most, at least early on. This is certainly the beginnings of developing your taste, but most people stop after the first couple of things they hear. They then associate that with childhood memories or someone that they love, and then they never move beyond it to anything that might make them a little uncomfortable. So what else can we do besides just copy our favorite artist? Well, this is typically how it works for everyone. We gravitate to a thing, we imitate that thing, probably poorly, and in failing to copy that thing we admire because, guess what, we're not that artist, we become something else. Something carrying the influence of that thing, but also a composite of all of our other influences and experiences as well. So the only thing somewhat unique that we bring to the table is our own individual combination of influences, and our personal interpretation of those influences, which might not even be the same as the original artist that we're emulating. This seems a little counterintuitive. We're trying to develop an original artist voice here, not just copy other people, and yet that's how I'm telling you to start. Well, you know those artists that we thought of in the beginning? This is exactly the process that they went through. And for our most recent heroes, you can find countless interviews where they talk about the people that influenced them and the way that that transformed the way they thought about music or their own art. So their unique artist voice that we love so much was derived from a combination of their influences and filtered through their own personal developed taste, which, by the way, they refined by trying things. Trial and error work. So I'm not suggesting that you only collect influences without taking any action. This will do you no good. The only effective method I've ever experienced personally to improve at any skill is to start attempting to do it, sucking for a while, trying again, sucking a little less, and simply not stopping that process until I don't suck anymore, or at least suck less than I did when I started. The same is true for developing your artistic voice. It's not going to happen overnight, so most people are going to stop when they encounter that first barrier of resistance. Give yourself permission to be bad at things. Write songs that you aren't happy with. Make videos that no one's going to watch because they're not great. Focus on improving just one or two things with each iteration. That's the beginning of any new skill. And if you have the patience simply not to give up on it, you will absolutely be much better than when you started, when you look back a year, 2, 5, 10 years later. If you'd like to learn some of the tools and techniques? If you'd like to learn some of the tools and techniques that I've personally used that have really helped me kind of overcome overwhelm as an artist and focus my creativity, you can grab my free ebook on composition that looks like that and will be linked in the description. It's absolutely free. Once you've combined a well-developed taste with this process of experimentation through trial and error, you've truly begun to develop your own voice. Now, your taste will change over time. That's totally normal. As you take in more influences, it further makes your voice more unique. And over time, you'll start to recognize what you do and don't gravitate towards. And if we approach that with intention and awareness rather than viewing it as a creative restriction, that will really bring our own workflow into focus. It will allow us to narrow down what we truly love, and it'll allow us to go deeper into our own voice rather than just skating across the surface of a number of different styles. Not to mention, you stand a much better chance of actually sticking around when the robot revolution comes for us all. If you got anything useful out of this video, you can give it a like. Looks like that. And maybe YouTube will show it to more people who could get something useful out of it. If you want to see more stuff like this on composition or synthesizers or electronic music production, you can subscribe to this channel. But most importantly, stop watching this video and go start sucking at something.